Welcome back to Decode Tech. Last video we talked about variables and a little bit of the stuff they can store, and this video is going to be a continuation off of that video. So if you haven't checked that video out yet, I do recommend you watch that one before you watch this one. So I'm going to go ahead and open up idle, the shell, and we're going to get more into how these variables work. So we already looked at some things that it could store, like numbers and phrases. Well, it can actually store itself. So if I have a variable, I'm just going to call it my_var, and I'm going to assign it to the value of 5. So my var is the variable name on the left, and the data it's storing is on the right side of the equal sign, which is going to be the number 5. And remember, a variable name is just a name to save this data into the computer's RAM. So I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to assign it. Now I can say another var gets my var, if I can type. Now if I print out another var, you might have already guessed it, but it should print out 5. So you can store another variable inside of a variable, and you're just getting the value from that variable. So you could reassign my var to something else, and then another var still will hold 5. And then my variable will store whatever the new thing is you assign to it. Okay, so that's that. So let's go over some variable naming rules now. I think I said you can name them almost anything you want, but there are a couple rules. So 1, a name can be as long as you want it to be. 2, it can have letters, numbers, or underscores. 3, they are case sensitive. So my var and my var with capital M are two different variables. They're not the same thing. If they don't match identical in uppercase, lowercase, they are different variables. 4, they can start with a letter or a underscore, but not a number. My var starts with a letter, so that's a legal name. Underscore my var, that works because it can start with an underscore. But 1 my var would fail because it has a number at the beginning. Can't do it. 5, they cannot have spaces. You cannot do my space var, but you can have underscores. So you could do multiple words in one variable a couple different ways. One popular way is to start out lowercase with my, and then the next word would be capitalized var, and then if you had another one, you could capitalize the first letter of that word. Another way to do it is just use an underscore, my_var. So you have options there, but you can't use spaces. All right, so that's the most important ones. There are a couple other ones, but that's just the ones that you need to get up and running. If you're interested, you can Google Python variable rules, and I'm sure you'll find more on that. All right, so far we've assigned phrases and numbers to variables. So let's look a little bit farther into that. So if you remember, the phrase looked like this, and the number looked like this. And so let's look a little bit more at this phrase. These phrases are called strings in Python. So from now on, I'm going to refer to these phrases as strings and stop saying phrases. So a string, by definition, is a character or series of characters, which could be letters, numbers, or punctuation. And how you designate a string in Python is with these quotes. So if you see quotes around something, it's a string, which is the actual text. And if you don't see quotes, that would be either a variable name or a number. Now these quotes can be either double quotes or single quotes. They're the same thing to Python, double or single. But whichever you start your string with, you have to end your string with. So if you start with a single quote and put a string in here, then you have to end it with a single. You can't end it with a double. If you start with a double, you have to end it with a double, and that'll work. Either one doesn't matter. But also throughout your file, try to stick with the same style. If you normally use single quotes, use single quotes. Don't be switching to double, single, double, single. Just keep it all the same. It's a nice coding style, they call it. Also, another thing with strings, if you remember last time, we added some strings together. So if I had like print a string, let's say Bob plus the string of Bill, that didn't actually add like addition. Like if you have numbers, 10 plus 5, that's addition, you get 15. Well, these are strings, which are text. So the plus operator acts differently. Instead of addition, it does that big word I mentioned, concatenation. And this just means joining together. So it will join these strings together. So I'm going to hit enter, and you see it prints out Bob and Bill joined together. So that's a little bit of a behavior of strings. Now I'd like to introduce the concept of multi-line strings. So I'm going to open a file to demonstrate this. So let me just open, go to Python tutorials. I'm just going to open up mistake.py. I think I've already modified it. Here we go. So here I have one string. I have a quote at the beginning and I have a quote at the end. And notice that my string isn't all highlighted green like it normally is in Python. And so that's a good sign that there's already an error. And that's because this can only be on one line like this for it to work correctly. I want it to print on multiple lines. So I'm going to hit enter again, and I'm going to break it up into multiple lines. And I'm just going to save it and run it, and we'll see what happens. Now you see we got an error. Okay, so if we wanted to print this out on multiple lines, we would either have to add print at the beginning of each line and surround them with our own parentheses from a print and beginning and ending quotes. We'd have to add a quote here, and a quote here, and a quote here, and then a print before this with a open parentheses, and a print before that with no capital P, and a closing parentheses, and a closing parentheses. And of course these are just dead spaces. We'll get rid of those. And then you'd want to put these off. So this is how you could print it out using just single line strings. Oops, missed a quote there. And this will work. I'll prove it just by running it. And there it works. But it could be faster to just get rid of these prints, especially if you hadn't already typed them. And then instead of having a quote at the beginning of each line, you can just do triple quotes. So 3 quotes at the beginning and 3 quotes at the end. Once again, these can be either single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter. But whatever you use at the beginning, you have to use at the end. So I'm going to add 2 quotes at the end, and I'm going to add 2 quotes at the beginning. Now you see it all turns green, which what strings normally do in idle. And so I'm going to get rid of these extra parentheses here and this extra quote. And now we just have 3. Oh, still missed one. Now we just have 3 at the beginning and 3 at the end. Now this should still work. The output will look the same. It's just less typing in our code, which is always nice to have less typing. So this is called a multi-line string when you have 3 quotes at the beginning and end. All right, back to variables for a little bit. A variable by name can change. Variable means it's changing. So the data that is assigned to a variable can be changed. For example, if I have a variable called num, and I'm going to say num gets 10, on the next line I could say num gets 15, and now I've reassigned that variable to 15. So if I print now, num will print out 15. So you see the data in a variable can change. And like I showed above where I had a variable storing another variable up here, you could now change my var to equal 10 and another var is still equal to the 5. So my var would equal 10 or whatever new data you put in it, and another var would still equal 5. So these variables can change, and they often do throughout programs. And like I said, with the multiple variable names on one piece of data, like once again up here we have another var and my var at this point both equal to 5. So 5, the piece of data, has 2 name tags, if you will, attached to it, another var and my var. Once no names are attached to that piece of data, Python will delete it from memory because it figures, okay, if he doesn't have a name on it, he doesn't need it anymore. That's called the automatic garbage collection system in Python. It frees up that memory so you can put new memory in it that is relevant. Some lower level languages don't have this automatic cleanup, and you actually have to free the memory that you're not using anymore so you can assign new data to it. It's really convenient, but there are some trade-offs which I won't get into in this video. Just know that Python has an automatic garbage collection system. If no variable name is attached to a piece of data, it'll just delete that data from the computer's memory. All right, we already talked about assigning variable name to another variable name, but now let's talk about assigning a variable to itself. So I'm just going to close out of this shell and get a new one just for a fresh start. And I'm going to say my var gets 5, and then I'm going to assign it to itself, which will look like this. Now, that didn't fail, so it worked. So let's print out my var and see what it stores. You should be able to guess that it will just store what was already in it. So that seems very useless. And in this context, it will seem useless. But once we get into files, we're going to see how this can be very useful in a program. And I'll show you what it looks like now, but it still won't look super useful. So you go my var, get my var, and now the difference is you add +1. Now essentially what this is saying is take whatever's in my var, which is 5 for now, and add 1 to it, and then store this result back into my var. If you're a good guesser, you could guess that my var should now equal 6. And that is going to be a very useful thing later on. That's called incrementing, and that is very useful in certain aspects of a Python program. Now, one thing to be aware with this is whenever you assign a variable, the variable name is always on the left side of the assignment operator. But occasionally, like we just did, it can appear on the right side. Just know that ultimately whatever is in the line, the result will be stored back into the variable that is on the left-hand side. So don't get confused of which variable is getting data assigned to it. This variable is just being used to do a calculation, and then this variable is where the calculation is then being stored. So the variable name on the left side is always the variable getting something assigned to it. All right, one last thing to look out for with variables is when you're naming a variable, we said you can name it almost anything you want. But be careful with this. You want to be intentional because, for example, if you say t, that's a very short variable name, but it is legal in Python, you can do it. T get 5. Now, nothing about t links you to 5. So if somebody's reading your code or even you're reading your own code and you see a name t, you're like, I don't know what that's storing. It doesn't tell you. A better name would be maybe num gets 5. Now you're saying, oh, okay, I see a word num, that's a variable. It's probably storing a number. A better one would even maybe just be spelling out number gets 5. Now you see number and you're like, oh, it has a number associated with it. So basically what I'm trying to say is describe your data that you're storing in the variable as best as possible with as short a variable name as possible, but not too short that it's too hard to remember what's stored in it. Okay, so that's all the new things I'm going to teach for today, but I do have a test that I made up to see if you're retaining this information, if you're interested. So I'm just going to open up Notepad now where I have the questions listed out. You can pause the video here and write down your answers on a piece of paper or a smartphone or something. And then after you pause the video, I'm going to scroll down to where the answers are and you can see how you did. All right, so that's going to do it for our video today. If you liked it, please smash the thumbs up button. It really does help out the channel. If you aren't already, please subscribe. That way you get notified when new videos come out. And you can hit the little bell icon to get an email when a new video releases. Comment down below with any questions you might have. And if you want, you could share it with friends or anybody you know that would enjoy this type of thing. We'd really appreciate it. And we hope to see you all in the next Python video.